Greetings folks and welcome to another 8/16/32-bit. I'm your host Rob, and today we're doing something a little bit special here. This is a compilation episode where I'm taking 4 videos where I looked at some Sega arcade classics and how they compared on the Master System and the Mega Drive. So in today's video you're going to see me look at Golden Axe, Altered Beast, Alien Storm and Outrun, and we're going to see which of Sega's machines got the better arcade conversion. So, without further ado, let's have a look at this Battle of the Bits as we look at 4 Sega arcade classics. Released in 1988, Altered Beast was a side-scrolling beat-em-up from Sega running on its System 16 hardware and proved to be incredibly popular with its setting of ancient Greek mythology. Now, naturally, as a machine built around the System 16 hardware, this meant Sega were going to convert this to their newly released Mega Drive platform, which used some of the same hardware within itself, such as the Motorola 68000 CPU. However, with the Sega Master System still being a massively popular machine in Europe and launching in the US, there was also going to be a version of the game for that. Now, today we're going to take a look at both of these versions and see just how well they converted from one powerful piece of hardware kit such as the System 16 to the less powerful but still quite powerful Mega Drive hardware and the significantly less powerful 8-bit Z80 based Master System hardware. So here we go with episode 2 of Battle of the Bits and Sega's Altered Beast. So first off, let's look at the Sega Mega Drive version. Now this was considered to be a big enough deal to be the packing title with the Mega Drive and Genesis when released in the West initially, in the pre-Sonic the Hedgehog days. And, well, as you can see, it looks pretty decent. Yes, it's missing the full intro sequence from the arcade, and you do get the sample speech with its wonderful level of lisping, because it does command you to rise from your grave. But as you can see here, it's a reasonably decent looking game. It's a very early Mega Drive title, so it perhaps doesn't look as good as some later ones, but everything here is pretty smooth. The scrolling's relatively smooth, the graphics are nice and big and smoothly animated. It looks the part. Yes, everything compared to the arcade game is a little bit different. The graphics aren't quite as chunky and as detailed, the sound isn't as good, but for what it is, this 16-bit version is really rather good, and it's certainly better than any of the other 16-bit versions. You get the wonderful transformation cinematics, but it is certainly much better than, say, the Amiga or Atari ST versions, which were probably the only comparable versions in terms of power, being based again around that similar 68,000 hardware. Now, I'm not going to pretend I'm any good at this game as usual. Most people who watch this channel know I'm pretty crap at most games. But here you have it. It's a decent looking game. Everything looks and plays quite smoothly, but it is a simple game at its heart. And I'm probably going to die here any second. In fact, I know I am, because I recorded this footage and I thought to myself, let's try and get to level 2. Come on. No. But I like it. As a packing game, you can see why it was done. It was a chance to show off the power of the new 16-bit hardware compared to its main competitor at the time, which was the Nintendo Entertainment System. And in that respect, it certainly achieves its aims. And now we move on to the Master System version. Now, I'm not going to lie here. This is a significant downgrade, excuse me, on the arcade version. It does still look pretty decent, especially in stills. However, when you compare it to the Mega Drive version, it's slow, it's clunky, it's jerky. Yes, the graphics aren't as detailed, although they do look pretty good. Although,
whether it's a case of the Master System was being pushed too hard or the programmers just weren't very good at optimization, I don't know. There are certainly games on the Master System that look better than this and are smoother than this. Now, that's not to say it's all bad. This is by far the best 8-bit version of the game out there, in my opinion, easily surpassing the similarly spec'd versions from the Sinclair Spectrum, the Amstrad CPC and the Commodore 64. And for the Master System there's some quite big sprite work going on here, but what I find is with it being so much slower and clunkier, it doesn't respond as well, and that actually makes the game harder, in my opinion, because you don't have the responsiveness, so you do take more hits from the enemies, as you can see in my playing it of here. I mean, it does retain some nice features, such as the enemies literally exploding into component pieces, but it's not brilliant. And you can see a few examples of where the sprite swapping's gone, but you do get versions of the transformation cinematics, something that was often missing from ports of games like this. Now, obviously, once you're fully powered up here like this, the game suddenly becomes a lot easier because you have the more powerful attacks. But it's still a painful experience to play, especially if you were a Master System owner who had a friend who had a Mega Drive and you put this next to their 16-bit conversion. Their version pretty much looked like an arcade machine. Your version looked like what it was, a cutback port of a powerful piece of arcade hardware running on a very, very much more restricted system. Now, don't get me wrong, it's still a reasonably fun game to play once you can get used to the control lag and the issues surrounding that, but it's just, it doesn't have the fluidity of its big brother. This is one battle of the bits where, unlike, say, like the previous Mortal Kombat 2 episode, where I could look at it and go, you know what, it's amazing that they've done this on this system. This is one where the 16-bit version easily takes the win. So there you have it, folks. A comfortable win for Sega's 16-bit conversion of Altered Beast over its own 8-bit conversion.
Now, let's get a little bit of background information in here first. So, Alien Storm is a 1990 arcade machine from Sega that was released on their System 18 hardware. Now, the System 18 hardware was basically a supercharged version of their much more famous System 16 hardware. It had some extra graphics capabilities and some extra sound capabilities on there, and for some strange reason it also used the same VDP as the Sega Mega Drive did. Now, when it came to the home versions, obviously, like many games at the time, it was converted to a lot of home computers, but today in Battle of the Bits, as is usual, I'm concentrating on the versions released for the Sega Mega Drive or Genesis and the Sega Master System. Now, there were a couple of differences, but we will get to those when we look at the games themselves. But the Mega Drive version was released first in Japan in the June of 1991, with follow-up releases in the US in the July of that year, and the UK and Europe in the September. Following that, in the October of 1991, the Master System version got its release in Europe. Now, basic explanation, Alien Storm is a scrolling beat 'em up, shoot 'em up kind of thing. It's very similar to Golden Axe, but with aliens instead of orcs, basically. So, without further ado, let's have a quick look at Alien Storm. So, as you can see here, we're starting off with the Sega Mega Drive and Genesis version, which was the first of the home conversions released. Now, strictly speaking, this isn't a home conversion. The game was substantially rewritten and restructured for the Mega Drive, so the levels are slightly different, there's a slightly different flow to it, so it's more of a reimagining rather than a straight arcade conversion. However, it is still very, very recognisably Alien Storm. You select one of the three characters, a male, a female and a robot, and you start killing aliens with your unique shooting them on the ground laser electric weapon. Now, this is quite an early Mega Drive game, really, you know, certainly for Western releases. And it looks pretty good. As I said in the intro, it's very similar to Golden Axe, and to be fair, it kind of looks like the entire game was based off the Golden Axe engine. Everything about it has a very similar look. Now, these side-scrolling levels are relatively good. As you can see, you've got a special move here which you did not have in the arcade game, and once you sort of work out your relative positioning to the enemies in terms of utilising your weapons, you can dispatch them pretty quickly. Getting in the wrong spot, however, makes it a touch more difficult. Now, it does break these side-scrolling levels up with these really quite enjoyable sort of Operation Wolf type levels. You know, you go into various buildings, you shoot monsters as they come at you from sort of the back of the store and the front of the store. Some will pop up suddenly at the front. It's a nice breaking pace, and to be fair, the Mega Drive does this pretty well. It handles quite well on the old joypad compared to some games that use this perspective for the full game itself. And yeah, it's generally a fun game. The levels are sort of short, bite-sized chunks, and they don't outstay their welcome. As I said, it's a fairly early period Mega Drive game. I think it looks pretty nice, all things considered. Sound, I think, is a little bit lacking for me, but it plays well, and that's what's important. As I said, it's a reimagining, not a straight arcade port, but it maintains the feel of Alien Storm, and that's what you want. You wouldn't really want it to be a completely different game. So, having looked at this 16-bit version, let's go and take a look at the version that was released for Sega's 8-bit console shortly thereafter. Now, here we have the Master System version, and straight away you can obviously tell it's on a much less powerful machine. However, this is a much more accurate conversion in that it has the exact layout and structure of the arcade version. So you are getting Alien Storm. Now, it plays perfectly well. I mean, it's an 8-bit version of a 16-bit arcade machine, but it plays like you would expect Alien Storm to play. There are differences, obviously. It's not as excitingly fast as the Mega Drive or the arcade versions, and obviously, as you can see, the graphics are somewhat downgraded. However, I think it does a pretty good job. You know, it's an early 90s Master System game, and it took what was quite a big arcade machine. You know, the System 18 was quite powerful hardware for the time, and it down converted it onto a Z80 based system with a limited power and a limited amount of RAM. And, you know, if you'd have got this as a kid, you wouldn't have been disappointed. It's a quality arcade conversion. I preferred it to the other 8-bit home computer versions that were available at the time on machines such as the Sinclair Spectrum and the Commodore 64, and I do think it compares favourably to the Mega Drive version. You know, yeah, it's not as colourful, it's not as musical, but hey, everything's here. Yes, everything, even the into the screen levels like this bit. Now, obviously not quite as advanced as the Mega Drive version, with enemies jumping backwards and forwards and dropping in from the ceiling, and obviously much simpler looking graphics, but it's enjoyable. Doesn't control quite as well, but it's still a perfectly playable rendition of the first person perspective sections. Now, it is a little bit different. Instead of scrolling in both directions, it tends to scroll just in the one direction, but it's a really, really, really good rendition of this part of the arcade machine. And again, when you take into account the differences in the hardware between Sega's Motorola 68,000 controlled System 18 board with its extra graphics capabilities and the Z80 based Master System, it's pretty darn good, to be fair. So, What conclusion can we draw? Well, let's talk about that, shall we? So, what conclusion can we draw here about the home versions of Alien Storm in Battle of the Bits? Well, I'm going to call this one a draw. Now, the Mega Drive version is fast, fluid, looks pretty good, sounds okay, and plays really well, which you would expect from a 16-bit machine, but the Master System version produces a really good rendition of a much more powerful piece of arcade hardware. And, you know, if you've got both of these machines, you'd be happy with either version of the game. Now, Golden Axe was an incredibly popular scrolling beat-em-up in the arcades released in 1989. It was released also in 1989 for the then new Sega Mega Drive and Genesis system, and then shortly afterwards in early 1990 for the Sega Master System. Now, obviously, these were arcade to home ports, so there are going to be some concessions made, but today we're going to have a look and see which of the two versions is indeed the better one. So, without further ado, let's get started with Golden Axe for the Mega Drive and Genesis. So, here we are with the version for Sega's 16-bit console, the Sega Mega Drive or Genesis for our American cousins. As you can see, you get a nice little intro screen there. It looks very arcade-like, not quite the same as the arcade, but darn close when you look at it. And it sounds pretty good too. Now, tracked mode there, didn't want that again, so we're just going straight into the arcade mode here. Obviously you have a choice of 3 characters. For the sake of simplicity, we're just sticking with the legendary Axe Battler, and as you can see, this is a pretty good looking early period Mega Drive game. You know, it looks like a damn close facsimile of the game Golden Axe in the arcade. Now, I'm going to be completely honest here, I'm not the world's biggest fan of Golden Axe. I have real issues with some of the little gameplay quirks it uses, especially in the home ports. I mean, one thing you'll notice, you always seem to get attacked by bad guys in pairs, and they will always try and bracket you, so there is one either side of you. Obviously, in an arcade, this is a really cheap and easy ploy to just get you to keep putting more money in by taking lives off you quickly and cheaply. I don't think it was needed for the home ports. I think they could have tweaked that. And you've just seen one of the little goblin gnomes there who give you power-ups to your magic, which we'll see shortly, because, yes, I'm sick of it. As you can see, Axe uses fire magic. There's different levels to the magic that you can access, depending on how many bottles you have collected. It has slightly different effects each time you upgrade the level. Now, this is another thing Golden Axe was saying, so it's ride on creatures. They do add an element of fun to the gameplay, which does take it a little bit out of the standard beat-em-up frame that was already becoming pretty much the norm at this point, even though we weren't that far removed from what you would call was the first modern scrolling beat-em-up in terms of gameplay, which was of course Double Dragon. Now, I have to say, despite the fact that I don't like Golden Axe, I find this Mega Drive versions play really well. It's a very, very good facsimile of the arcade machine. Obviously, it's not perfect. The animation's a little jerkier. It's not quite as smooth and fast, but it plays a decent game of Golden Axe. So, in a second, we'll get to the Master System version and see just how well or not that version of the game does. So, here we are on Sega's 8-bit machine, and you can see straight away cutbacks have been made. First off, we don't get the little arcade track sequence. You don't even get to choose characters, all you have is Axe. But, as you can see, it's still recognisably Golden Axe, right down to the bad guys bracketing you. And yeah, it looks pretty good, to be fair. You know, the sprites are recognisable. As you can see, the magic does cause all the backdrops to disappear because of the limitations of the system, but this is very definitely and very obviously Golden Axe. As I said, it looks pretty good. By 1990, coders had pretty well got the hang of the Master System at this point and were producing games which were a significant step up from the earlier titles on the system. This is a prime example of that. A quite substantial arcade machine squeezed down into Sega's little 8-bit wonder. Now, obviously, it doesn't quite sound as good. That's the problem with just using the built-in sound chip on the Master System and not the FM add-on, which was never available outside Japan anyway. And it's fair to say that there are other cutbacks that have been made. You noticed that we didn't have the little section of the level there with the little gnome. Instead, we go straight to fighting these two bad guys. Well, cutbacks have to be made. It's a weaker system, it has less memory available, the cartridges are smaller. You do get this second bit with the little gnome things, which is actually far easier to get the bottles from them on because they stick to one plane of movement each rather than running up and down and jumping all around. You still have the different levels to the magic like in the arcade and Mega Drive versions. And to be fair, yeah, as I said, this is a damn good conversion, especially given the limitations of the machine. I enjoy it. To me, it actually feels a touch more difficult than the Mega Drive version. That may be due to the fact that obviously it's a slightly slower pace again. The animation isn't as smooth, and it does feel like there's a little bit of a delay between your action and the response on screen. But overall, it's not a bad conversion. So, yeah, Golden Axe for the Master System. It's a good little version for a good little machine. So, which version's going to win this battle of the bits? Well, to be completely honest, I have to give it to the Mega Drive version. It's just closer to the arcade original, but it's a near-run thing. The Master System version really does put up a great fight and shows just what could be done on the system with skilled coders. Outrun, Sega's legendary arcade racing classic, a game of massive arcade cabinets, which always drew people's attention, clear blue skies, the beach, exotic scenery, and incredibly sexy Ferrari Testarossas. Or at least they were incredibly sexy if you were a young or teenage boy back in the 80s like myself. Now, running on Sega's System 16 hardware, this was a sprite scaling powerhouse of a game, which threw sprites and scenery around at speeds pretty much never seen before and very rarely seen in other racing games of this type since. However, with its popularity, Outrun was always destined to end up on Sega's home machines, and so it was with a Mega Drive version and not one but two different Master System versions, although we're only looking at one today because the version with the 3D glasses doesn't display properly. So, in today's Battle of the Bits, we're going to look at the Sega Mega Drive or Genesis version of Outrun and the Sega Master System version and ask which is the better conversion when you take into account everything to do with the machines. So, without further ado, let's crack on with the first version of Outrun. So here we have the 16-bit version for the Mega Drive. As you can see, you get to choose your tunes and you're out on the track. And to be fair, given the difference in power between the System 16 arcade hardware and the Mega Drive and the similarities involved, it doesn't look too bad. Yeah, it's not quite arcade perfect, but trust me, this was as close as it was getting at the time, and it does move at a fair pace. Yes, it's a little bit jerky in its scaling, and yes, it doesn't quite have the amount of detail surrounding the track that the arcade version did, but come on, if you've ever played any of the other versions of Outrun that have been released up to this point, you know exactly what
this was compared to them, and that was superb. If you take the 8-bit home computer versions, or even the 16-bit computers like the Amiga and ST, which had notoriously awful versions of Outrun, this game is absolutely superlative in comparison. And it handles quite well also. You know, it plays a good game of Outrun, and that's what's important really, is does it play right? And the answer is yes. Outrun for the Mega Drive plays right. It's a damn good conversion of a damn good game. But, as you'll see, there is another Sega version to come. And here we have the Master System version. Now, obviously, the difference in power between the arcade hardware and Sega's 8-bit home console was quite significant. You're going from twin Motorola 68,000 CPUs to a single Z80 CPU. However, it manages it really well, all things considered. Yes, there's a huge amount of detail missing from the track side, and the track layout is slightly different there at the start, but you know what? It moves really well, and it plays pretty well. Yes, the audio can be a bit grating. That is generally an issue with the Master System, unless it's one of the very rare games that use the FM sound, and even they were only available in Japan. But, you know, with the limitations of the machine, with its colour palette, with the amount of RAM it has, the power of the CPU, this is a damn fine version of Outrun. It plays pretty well also, you know, and it is recognisably Outrun. Everything that you would expect from Outrun to be there is there. The blue sky, the bright red Ferrari, the palm trees, the sand, the sea. This is Outrun. And it's a damn fine version. It's easily the best of the 8-bit versions by a country mile. But is it as good a conversion as the Mega Drive one? Well, I would argue yes, especially given the limitations of the machine. This is far, far better than it has any right to be. The Master System was not a powerful console by any definition. Even by the standards of the time for an 8-bit machine, despite having some great graphics, it wasn't hugely powerful using a standard Z80, but this is an amazing version of the game for a console that shouldn't have been running it this well. So, which is the better version of Outrun? Well, if I'm going to be completely honest, I am actually going to award this one to the Master System. The arcade machine that Outrun came from the hardware, it shouldn't have been possible to do the game as well as Sega managed to do on the Master System. The gulf in power was immense, yet there is a really good, recognisable and perfectly playable version of the game for owners of Sega's 8-bit hardware to enjoy. Now, that isn't to say that the Mega Drive version is bad, far from it. It's just much less of an impressive technical achievement than the Master System version is. Anyway, that's my thoughts on Outrun for Battle of the Bits between Sega's 8 and 16-bit machines. Why don't you tell me what you think in the comments down below? If you've enjoyed this video, hit like. If you really enjoyed it, hit subscribe. And this is Rob saying so long, and I will see you on the next video.